But Lithuania believes that a real lever to force the Kremlin to sit down at the negotiating table could be its frozen Russian assets. Moreover, this is a real resource to support Ukraine. This has already been stated by the head of the Lithuanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Kęstutis Budrys.
Until now, the issue of Russian assets has been stalled by France, Italy, Bulgaria, and Malta. Has the situation changed, and is the European Union now ready to return to this issue? Our special correspondent in Brussels, Anna Hryshina, analyzes the situation.
The EU has once again brought up the frozen central bank of Russia funds in the West, perhaps for the first time since the beginning of the year. The last time this topic was raised in the EU was before agreeing on a €1 billion loan for Ukraine. At that time, a number of countries opposed confiscation. Now Lithuania has reminded everyone about the Russian assets.
Russian state assets are a real resource to support Ukraine and a real lever to force Russia to negotiate. The agreement on an interest-free loan of €90 billion for Ukraine was a useful step, but not the final answer to Kyiv's long-term needs. This is not the end yet.
From the very first days of the full-scale invasion, EU leadership proposed using Russian sovereign assets as a reparations loan for Ukraine. Kyiv called for their complete confiscation. At that point, Brussels began developing a mechanism to implement that operation. However, this turned out to be insufficient because within the European Union there are countries such as Slovakia and, until recently under Prime Minister Orban, Hungary, which followed pro-Kremlin policies and blocked any decision that would harm Moscow, as well as those states for whom, quite simply, it is financially disadvantageous to hand over Russian assets.
We have repeatedly said that we consider the reparations loan option to be the worst because it is risky and has no precedent. The reparations loan scheme carries corresponding economic, financial, and legal risks. It is unacceptable to use the money and leave us alone with the risks.
But it's not just about the risks, it's also about the profits. Most Russian assets are held by CSD Belgian Depository, the company Euroclear, about €176 billion. Since Russia cannot reclaim them, the funds are at the free disposal of the depository and generate income for it through investing these assets in the securities market. Recently, Brussels announced the allocation of an additional €80 million to Kyiv from the profits generated by frozen Russian assets, which, according to EU legislation, do not belong to Russia. As for the €90 billion loan, the EU provided it from its own reserves. And that was an auxiliary plan to support Ukraine. The key idea was precisely to use Russian assets.
Plan A was to use the frozen Russian assets. So we should remember, if Plan B doesn't work, then let's return to Plan A. But we definitely need to fulfill our commitments to Ukraine, to provide funding to resist Russian aggression.
However, the proposal to confiscate the Russian central bank's resources has still not been supported by Italy, Spain, France, or Germany. At the beginning of May, the Netherlands, during a closed meeting of EU finance ministers, proposed to return to the discussion of using Russian assets. However, they did not find support among their colleagues. Although, if a reparations loan for us had been approved, Ukraine would now be supported not with their own budgets, but with Russian reserves. Moscow, however, is not going to give up its assets so easily. In May, it filed its second lawsuit with the EU court. It is challenging the use of its state assets to support Ukraine. And separately, it is demanding to recover funds from the Belgian depository, an astronomical sum of nearly €250 billion. So now the prospect of the European Union confiscating Russian assets looks even more elusive than before. However, Brussels also has no intention of returning the money to Russia before the war ends and Ukraine is rebuilt.
Meanwhile, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has confirmed the shutdown of the Syzran oil refinery in the Samara region. Ukrainians struck it on May 21st. This is already our second attack on this enemy plant, which supplied fuel to the Russian military. There is also confirmation of strikes on Russian command posts and an enemy drone depot in the temporarily occupied territories of Zaporizhzhia region and Donetsk region.
In fact, since the beginning of the day, the Russian army has attacked the positions of the defense forces nearly 50 times. Half of these attacks were recorded by the General Staff in the Pokrovsk and Hulyapol directions. Our defenders repelled 9 assaults in the Kostiantynivka direction. There were 4 combat engagements each in the Lyman and southern Slobozansky sectors. Well,
next, we'll tell you how your curiosity could cost you your life. It's important to know that even a downed enemy drone is a deadly trap. You must not only avoid touching it, but not even approach it.
Why don't instructions from the internet protect you from an explosion? And what happens to those who decide to play movie-style bomb disposal experts? Our own Irina Antoniuk reports, an experienced military sapper.
There's a Shahed drone lying around. Its nose is a bit broken, everything is leaking out of it, and we're going to neutralize it now. Even we, as sappers, don't touch anything. Carefully, we placed an explosive charge over the warhead, lit the fuse, and then stepped back to a safe distance.
With expert precision, the military sapper, using the call sign Shkidnik, together with his comrade, completely destroyed the Russian Shahed.
The results of the entire neutralization: a small crater was blown out, and the drone itself is still burning. And there's a lot of black smoke coming from it.
Shkidnik enlisted under contract back during the ATO and rejoined the military when the full-scale invasion began. He was immediately assigned to the sappers, and for the 5th year now, he has been destroying Russian hardware and mines. And he is very surprised when civilians try to dismantle the remains of Shaheds or shells.
Why do civilians need to get involved in that? 15 liters of gasoline is clearly not worth a lost hand or a lost life.
Shkidnik shares that there are never identical mines or booby traps. Each case is unique, and even the same shell can go off in different ways. That's why there is no single manual for demining. But the most important thing to remember is that every Russian shell is trying to kill us.
If you watched how they defuse mines in a movie somewhere, or if you ask GPT chat how to do it, that still doesn't mean you'll be able to pull it off.
The 115th Separate Mechanized Brigade is currently carrying out combat missions in eastern Ukraine, specifically in the Kupiansk and Lyman directions. They are in great need of portable charging stations, and you can help the soldiers raise funds for them by using the QR code you now see on the screen. Such chargers will help Shkidnik and his comrades do their work more effectively.
When we activate it, there will be 6 minutes. It ignites the donor, which is wrapped here, to the detonation cord, which in turn will transfer the explosion to 8 separate charges.
Only professionals can handle explosives with such precision, Shkidnik insists. It's dangerous for civilians to even approach unexploded shells or downed Shaheds. One such tragic story happened at the beginning of April in the Cherkasy region. 4 men stopped to look at a downed drone in the middle of a field and were killed. So, to convince people to be cautious, the specialists demonstrated what can happen even from a small charge.
Now we will show what a single 200-gram minimum TNT block can do to a piece of wood about as thick as the average person's arm. Moreover, we know that wood is a bit stronger than a human arm. As they say, this is a clear demonstration to convince you that playing with explosives is definitely not worth it.
From Kharkiv region, Irina Antoniuk, Oleksiy Jushkov. We are Ukraine. Marathon. United News.